On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina. All right, everybody, real quick before we get into part 2 of our two-part series with Jeff Dolan, I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our sponsors of the PBSCCS podcast. These companies are Momentous, Woodway, Aura Ring, Garden of Life, Proven 4, Direct Fitness Solutions, and Clean Athlete. Thank you again to all these companies for being all-star sponsors of the PBSCCS. And with that being said, let's get into the episode with Jeff. All right, everybody. I am here with Jeff Dolan on the podcast today. So the last time that I had you on, Jeff, which was just our last episode we released, you were with the Phoenix Suns. And now, obviously, you are back in professional baseball. So just give us kind of an update on where you're at in your career, and then we're going to ride with some isometric stuff.
Perfect. Yeah. So, again, I'm Jeff Dolan. The basketball guy is back, but he's not a basketball guy anymore. He's back to a baseball guy. I can happily announce that I am now with the Boston Red Sox. My being on the podcast, I don't think had anything to do with that. Chris was not part of the hiring committee, so my employment now by the same organization as Coach Chris is purely coincidental, just to get that out of the way. But I will be at the AA level this summer. Hopefully we'll get up there. Hopefully we will play minor league baseball this year, and I'm excited to start the new chapter here, get back into something that is familiar yet new, and I'm just ready to rock.
Yeah, man, congrats on coming back in, and welcome to the org. Like you said, I didn't have anything to do with it. It was all of your own accord. So that obviously that speaks highly to what your references say, what your resume says, how you interview, all of that stuff. Before we get into your isometrics course, just transitioning back into professional baseball now, what is the appeal of coming back to baseball for you? Obviously, you were with the Yankees, and then you were at Illinois doing college baseball, and then you were with the Suns doing basketball, and now you're back. And I can tell you're excited to be back in professional baseball. So what is it that's so appealing to you about working with baseball players?
I think because I was in baseball for pretty much my whole career, beside the last year, I was never able to really divorce myself or separate myself from a mentality of how do things go in baseball. So obviously being in the NBA, you're part of a large staff, you're part of a quote unquote high performance program. And there are a lot of facets to that, as everyone is, aware of and familiar with. And I was never able to not ask myself the question of, okay, how can I utilize these principles or this type of organization or these types of strategies for organizing how best to serve our players within the context of a baseball team, whether that's at the college level, at the low pro level, or at the higher minor league or possibly major league someday level. So I'm excited to take some of what I've learned in these different environments and apply them to my new project here, and also to contribute what I can to the organization as a whole, as we, as a collective unit, strive to continue to make things better and to help develop guys who can succeed at the big league level and win. So yeah, I'm excited for this new deal here.
Did you find yourself at like basketball games just thinking about like, man, I wish I was watching baseball, or like, back when I was with Illinois, or back when I was with the Yankees, we did this? I feel like my first couple of years with the Red Sox, I had been with the Pirates before, and I was like, oh, with the Pirates we did this, and like to the point that I was like annoying people. Did you ever catch yourself doing that? Like, man, I actually probably wish I was still back in baseball right now. Or was it just something that kind of came together more organically for you?
I think, I mean, obviously I focused as much as possible on the basketball thing. I spent a lot of time trying to learn the sports, trying to talk to sport coaches, as we talked about in the last podcast interview, just understanding the game because I played baseball growing up, so I was at least somewhat familiar. I wasn't good, but I was, of any of the sports, team sports, I think baseball is where I feel most comfortable. Basketball was something completely new to me, so I had to really work to understand everything that was going on there. But I think, I use some of the baseball specific skills I think are actually very compatible with what basketball players need. I actually, believe it or not, I did have two basketball guys that had some like shoulder issues just from shooting the ball so often. So, they came to me in the weight room and we did some overhead stuff. We got their scaps moving. We dealt with, some overhead interventions to help keep them out of basically what they were just impinging on their shoulder. And, that's part of a larger conversation about why, but I think that was very, very applicable. And I think I can't attribute to this to myself. I have to attribute this to Pat Davidson, Dr. Pat Davidson, because I've heard him say this, but having worked in both of these sports, I think it's very true. He actually draws parallels between baseball players and basketball players, and that they're both very like reference based, very feel based. So especially let's say shooters in basketball are very similar to pitchers in baseball, where, the second you touch a ball on that day, you know if it's going to be a good day or a bad day. The second the pitch leaves your hand, if not before, whether you're going to hit your spot or not. When you're a shooter and you release the ball, if it's in or not. So being able to appreciate how in tune both of those athletic populations are with their bodies, and being able to recognize that you need to be aware of that, is super important. And I think also something that oftentimes gets left out, and something that both baseball and basketball strength coaches understand more so than maybe some other types of strength coaches that work with different populations, is those are two types of athletes that you can really screw up in a weight room. So I think the parallels between baseball and basketball, we talked at length about it last time, but there are a lot of similarities, and a lot of skills that I developed in one sport helped in the other. And I definitely think that's going to be the case as I go back to my original sport here.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the feel aspect. I have a couple guys out here in Phoenix that I work with in the off season, and we'll lift and throw, and occasionally we'll shoot some hoops at the park or whatever, some free throws, and like I know right away when I'm playing catch with a guy that as soon as the ball comes out, I'm like, dude, I got no feel of it today. Like, you might be chasing these balls around, or like if I'm shooting a free throw and I'm like, oh, I got it today. Like, it just feels really good out of the hand. And that's something that myself personally, I've kind of thought of more lately, is like, when I train with those guys, there is a big chance that you can screw them up in the weight room because of how skill dominant those sports are and how feel based they are. That like like you can feel great in the weight room. Like, yeah, I really went hard today on, squats or deadlifts or bench or whatever it is. And you go out and you throw and you're like, I have no feel of it. And you're like, well, that session might have actually been counterproductive. So it's interesting that you bring that up. It's something that I've kind of been pondering myself, and that maybe that's another talk. And then the other thing that I was thinking of is, you talk about, you took some skills as a strength coach in baseball and you brought them to basketball with you. And I'd imagine now that the skills that you've learned in basketball are going to help you in baseball. Right now, you're going to be in AA, you're going to be working with higher level guys. And the basketball players that you've worked with, you've already been around those big personalities. There's a lot of money in basketball and things like that, that those conversations you can help you navigate your way through working with some higher level baseball players now. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, I actually wrote out, I'll release this at some point. But as I reflected on my time in the NBA, one of the things that I took away from it as a learning experience was just, I came up with a list of 5 or 6 things that I was able to identify as principles that I apply when I work with higher, like really high level athletes. So in the case of baseball, I would say AA and higher. And a lot of those have to do with the fact that once someone reaches the AA level, or once someone reaches the NBA level, at that point they are a truly experienced professional. Even if they're a young kid, they've been in the system for probably a couple few years by that point. So they've developed an expectation around what a strength and conditioning coach should be and should provide. And depending on their background, then you're going to need to take that into account with how you approach them. And part of that is going to be just asking them, hey, what have you done in the past that you felt worked? What have you done in the past that didn't work? What do you hate? What do you like to do? Then it's on you to decide, okay, maybe someone doesn't like to do something because it's difficult and they find it too challenging, and it hurts their ego to not be good at it. Well, then it's on you to determine whether that's something that, yeah, it might benefit them. So maybe we need to be a little bit salesman-y and frame it in a way that will communicate to them why that will help them. Or it may be that literally is taking them to a point where it's moving their body in a certain direction that will actually detract from their performance. And again, we talked about reference-based and field-based athletes. If you do something that makes you feel like crap, that's a problem. So, being able to understand that you are going to probably run into situations where someone has their guy that they work with in the off season, and that guy, has their trust, and they want to do basically their recommendations in season. And especially at the top level, especially at the NBA, you're going to find that. You find that in the big leagues of baseball too. And you kind of have to be okay with that. And you don't necessarily run into that, and you definitely don't run into that in college. You don't really run into that a whole lot in the low pros, but as you go up, it's a more common experience. So you can do one of two things as a strength coach in that situation. You can get butthurt and you can let your ego get in the way and say, well, so-and-so doesn't know what they're doing. I'm better. This guy, I don't understand why this guy doesn't trust me. I mean, we've had a discussion during the last podcast about the fact that there are plenty of reasons that high-level athletes don't trust a lot of people, because if everyone's trying to get a piece of you and to benefit off of your ability to play a sport, typically these guys have experienced their whole life of guys trying to utilize their talent to then get a leg up on everybody else and take credit. Oh, I coached so-and-so when they were 15, and I created this monster right here. Look at me, I'm the best coach ever. Well, no, they're probably going to be that great either way. Did you have a positive influence, and did you help them with their skills or their physical development or whatever? And were you a good mentor to them? Yeah, certainly that could be the case. But if another guy, if your athlete trusts another guy a little bit more at that point in time, the worst thing you can do is challenge that to the point where they are going to absolutely write you off. Because at the end of the day, you're there, your boots are on the ground with them, you are able to make adjustments and help hopefully keep them on the field and succeeding. And, if you're at the AA level, hopefully moving up to AAA in the show. But part of that process may be just saying, okay, look, I'm here for you. I don't want anything from you except to see you succeed. If you want to do this other program, that's cool. I will be here to make sure that goes to plan. If you need me to coach you up on any of these other exercises, cool, I will do that. And in my experience, oftentimes guys might come around a little bit. Maybe one day they will come up to you and say, hey, what do you got for me? And you may be a little bit surprised at that point, but you've built up that reservoir of trust. you've demonstrated that you have their best interest in mind, and now you can hit the ground running and start implementing your ideas.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, for me, I've been in a few situations like this, and it seems like they're almost testing you on purpose to see where your loyalty lies, right? Like, hey, what do you think about this guy, so and so? And like, oh yeah, he's a great guy. He's got good content. Oh yeah, he's my off-season guy. And then all of a sudden, you hit it off with that guy. You're like, oh no, that guy doesn't know anything. I know more than him. And you're like, oh, well, I trained with that guy in the off season. So what do you got to say about that? And you're like, oh, I just put my foot in my mouth. And it's funny, they'll just come challenge you like that or test you just to see where you're at. And some of the best relationships I've had with players are just those guys that, like, they don't necessarily buy into what we're saying or doing immediately, but I gave them their space. I worked within what they were comfortable with, and then they opened up to me, like you said. And then after that, it was like, hey, what do you got? What do you got? What do you got? And I to the point that, like, I couldn't get them to leave me alone, which is probably a good thing. But it's really, really an interesting dynamic. And my first year in AA, I had come from rookie ball, and that was a big eye opener to me. Was some of the guys there had big league time already, and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to you. You're 23 years old. Like, I've got showtime. Like, what are you going to provide me? And I had to really, like, look in the mirror and be like, okay, one, I don't know everything. And two, like, if this guy trusts somebody else, and I need to know who that person is so that I can help this guy, because like you said, we're with them every day. We're in the trenches with them, and these off-season trainers are not. So they might not have as good of a picture. And instead of saying, hey, we know what we're doing because we're with you and you shouldn't listen to that guy, like, why don't we take that guy's suggestions and talk to him and be like, hey, I know you had this for him this week, but we had a really hard travel week. We had some extra inning games or overtime games in the NBA, whatever it is. What do you think about making these adjustments? And then you end up working together. The player sees that and they're like, oh, okay, I'm on board with this guy. Like, he's an extension of my guy, quote unquote, right? Like, everybody has my guy, especially the higher up you go. He's just an extension of my guy, so I'll listen to him now. And I think having that NBA experience is going to really help you navigating your way in the higher levels of baseball for sure. So I'm excited for you to be back, man. I can tell you're excited, and obviously selfishly, I'm excited that you're back with us in the Red Sox organization. But I want to transition. I want to switch gears a little bit here. You have an isometrics course that you came out with. Clearly, you made the most of your quarantine time. So I want to dive into that. And as I told you off camera, I haven't had a chance to dive in yet. I'm in the process of working through a move and everything. But as soon as I get settled in, I'm going to dive in, because I'm a big believer in what isometrics can provide. So anything that you want to share with us, either in terms of the course itself or the process of creating that course, in the hopes that there might be other coaches out there who have ideas and they just don't know how to put the pen to paper and put something together like this. So maybe just start with a general overview of what the course is, and then we can kind of let the conversation flow from there.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for the intro there. So my course is called Isometrics for Performance and Health, a comprehensive guide, silly title or whatever, but it gets at kind of the main purposes of what we're trying to get into. Is basically, what I have found is that isometric training, I think it's one of the most efficient methods of training you can use, because this is kind of my tagline on it, is that it's where training for performance and training for health meet. It's the intersection of those two things. And I think you would be hard pressed to find any strength and conditioning coach in the profession that doesn't hang their hat on the ability to provide those two things, improve performance, improve outputs, but also hopefully reduce injuries. And isometrics is a really efficient way to accomplish both of those tasks. And I think isometric training is a method that I've utilized with absolute beginners and absolute freaks and everyone in between. And the best thing about it is that you can manipulate the way that you utilize that type of training to accomplish a wide variety, multitude of goals, depending on how you set it up. So I set out to kind of cover everything I could think of in terms of how you would implement isometric training. And I ended up with basically 5 major sections of the course. The course is it's a video course, so there's a lecture component. There are embedded videos with coaching points within all the lectures. It's broken down into chapters that are short and digestible, easy to get through. And at the end, I put it all together. I have 2 sample programs that are multi-phase programs. The sections of content are basically, we start with how you can use isometric training to improve movement quality. We get into a whole bunch of other topics related to that. We talk about the myofascial system. We talk about myofascial dynamics in human locomotion and high speed movement, which is sport. Then we get into isometrics for health. The 2 major topics we get into are one for tendinopathy, tendon injuries. So last year I actually had a pretty moderately advanced case of patellar tendinopathy on my left knee. I probably had that going on for 5 or 6 years and never bothered to actually address it because I was just super into lifting and didn't really care about, running or doing any sort of, athletic thing whatsoever. So I could kind of get away with it. And then I started trying to run and play a little basketball, and my knee it hurt like hell. So I was basically able to utilize these principles, especially isometric training, to actually fill in the degenerative spot on my patellar tendon. I actually have some images of my knee before and after, and I go into exactly what I did to do that. So super practical takeaway there. I get into some isometric hamstring stuff, which I think is actually super applicable to baseball because we run into hamstring issues quite often. We can get into that a little bit later. I think that might be a good place to go with it. We get into isometrics for strength and power. So this is more of your meathead kind of exciting strength conditioning, weight room stuff, overcoming isometrics. A little bit about isometrics for hypertrophy, and then again, how do we put it all together throughout a year? Where do we use certain types of isometrics over the course of a periodized program? And then 2 examples of exactly how I might do it.
Who influenced you in the sense of like, where did you go to get this information? So like, we were off camera and I was saying that I had read Cal and Chris Corfus's triphasic speed program, and it had the spring ankle series. And that kind of got my ball rolling on isometrics and things like that. And then obviously I've seen some of your posts on Instagram with like the lunges. I would like to get into the hamstring stuff because I don't know what exactly you have in there, but like, where were your influences that kind of created this big picture isometric course for you?
Yeah, so I think there's a ton of them. I literally my second slide or third slide in the presentation, I spend like 5 minutes thanking all the people that influenced me. I just always try to do that because I never invent anything. Everything I do is stolen from what other people have done. I think isometrics as a general concept, almost like a training trend, has come back into popularity over the last few years. It was kind of forgotten for a little while. In terms of being like an old school method, it's about as old school as it gets. Like there's evidence that they used, basically isometric training back in ancient cultures. Like there's some, allegedly, I haven't seen it, but allegedly there's some like Egyptian ruins, hieroglyphics that like are pictures of people training what looks like isometrically. Obviously, if anyone has any experience with, the martial arts community, you walk into any martial arts school of various martial arts disciplines and you're going to probably see some sort of isometric training as part of what they do. So they've literally been around forever. And then they've kind of come in and out of fashion. Like as you trace the whole history up, they were kind of popular in the early 20th century, and then really popular like in the mid 20th century. Bruce Lee did a lot of isometric work. Bob Hoffman at York Barbell made isometric training very popular. And there's a lot of like real old school research on isometric training from him, and then like the Soviets and that type of thing. Obviously, if you read Super Training, it's in there. Everything is in Super Training. I wouldn't suggest reading it cover to cover, but if you're looking for something, you'll probably find it in there. But I think lately, over the last, I would say 5 years, it's gotten really popular again. And I think a lot of that is due to, Joel Smith has a great podcast, and I know he got really into isometrics, and he kept having different guests who utilize a lot of isometric training. And I think it kind of spread from there. Max Schmarzo and Matt Van Dyke wrote a great book about it. I know, obviously Cal does a ton with it, and Chris, Dan Fichter, who's an unbelievable coach, super underrated. He's a Rochester guy. He's been doing isometrics for decades. He apprenticed directly under Jay Schrader, who around the early 2000s kind of did a lot of this isometric stuff. So really long story short, but a ton of people have influenced me in terms of looking into it. With the tendon health stuff, Dr. Keith Barr is probably a game changer in terms of what he's brought with his research on tendon and ligaments. So I've tried to take all these different influences, pare it down to a digestible, product, and added my own interpretation of research and my own personal experience in implementing this type of training, both with beginners, college guys, and some of the freakiest freaks in the world at the highest levels of basketball.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've always thought as knowledge is either like something that I stole from someone else, or just like my own like negative experiences that I've learned from. So clearly you have a lot of influence for this course, and it sounds awesome that you're taking all of those different people's thoughts and things like that and putting it into one area. I think that's a big problem in strength and conditioning, is like there's so much information about given topics that when one course or something like that comes out and it's all of those influences in one spot, it just makes it so much easier for me. Because if I want to read, eccentric training, for instance, I go here, I go here, I go here, I go here, and I got a million things. And I'm like, I just need to put these all together in one place. Like, where can I do that? And it sounds like you've done that. And like I said, I'm really interested in isometrics. I can remember when I was working in the fall league, I was at the Rangers complex where we were playing, and I was sitting outside on the phone just talking to one of our other strength coaches, telling him like, dude, I don't know why, but I think isometrics is going to be the future of baseball. Like I just think it's going to change the game. I just don't know how yet. I need to put my thoughts together on this. And so I'm really interested to dive into your course. And with that being said, I don't want you to give away the full course here, because I want people to go and actually dig into it. But let's get into a little bit of the stuff in there. You said the hamstring thing, and obviously that's very prevalent, very relevant in baseball. So let's dive into that. Just whatever you want to give us without, wherever you feel comfortable drawing the line, but anything that you want to share on that, I am definitely all ears.
Okay. So there's a guy from the Netherlands named Franz Bos, and he's written a bunch of books. He looks at things through a different lens. He was actually, I think he was the guy who was like a medical illustrator. So he like got his start by looking at the body from that perspective, like really looking at the structure in order to document it and illustrate it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty confident about that. That's how he started. And then he kind of from there got into like the track and field world as a coach, mostly with sprinters and I think hurdlers, jumpers, that type of thing. His newest book, or his second newest book, is called Strength Training and Coordination or something like that. He looks at training, auxiliary training, a little bit differently than most of us do here. And he is a little extreme with some things he says. Like he's big on, he says things, I think he likes to get people riled up. He says things like, weight training actually doesn't help performance at all, which, that's not true. And who knows, his English isn't amazing, so some of it could get lost in translation. Long story short, he has done a lot of work, especially recently, and his research suggests that, so he's big on the concept of muscle slack, right? So the concept of muscle slack is when a muscle is at rest, it's not ready to go yet. It's actually hanging slack like a rope. In order for the contractile elements of the muscle to actually shorten, the fibers need to align and then shorten. So the time that it takes from a muscle being sent to the brain, to the muscle, all the muscle physiology stuff, action potentials, all that nonsense that we've all tried to forget, the time it takes between the brain and the muscles actually shortening is called the electrochemical delay. So basically the ability to, as quickly and efficiently as possible, line those fibers up and then shorten them is a key determinant in rate of force development. And obviously we know that rate of force development is one of the most relevant physiological qualities for sports, because it's not how much force you can produce, it's how much force you can produce in a limited amount of time that's going to determine how you perform. So his research suggests that the classical model of thinking that when the foot is accelerated towards the ground in a sprint, we would typically look at that as being eccentric because the attachment points of the hamstring are moving apart. His research suggests that the attachment points of a muscle can move apart without the muscle fascicles themselves actually lengthening. And that lengthening, that distancing of attachment points is actually due to the muscle slack being taken up so that the muscles can then contract. So he suggests that sprinting, the muscular action of the hamstrings while sprinting is not eccentric, it's isometric. And now we, over the last however many years here, 10, 20 years in the strength and conditioning world, obviously we've made it a priority to address the hamstrings because people pull their hamstrings all the time when in sprinting sports. So you see a lot of hamstring issues in American football, soccer, and baseball. So we do things like the Nordic hamstring curl, right? Because we need to prepare them with high degrees of eccentric force ability to withstand that force going through the hamstring when we sprint. But here's the problem. There's a lot of evidence. I mean, there's just straight numbers that hamstring injuries in things like the English Premier League soccer, in the NFL, in minor league and major league baseball, hamstring injuries keep going up every year. So you would think that if what we're doing in addressing it via eccentric training methods is actually effective, then we would see injury rates go down, but they're not. So maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and take a look at what we're doing. If the hamstring is in fact acting isometrically during either the late swing phase or early stance phase, then we probably need to train it isometrically. And this gets into, I talk at length about this in section 1 of that course from isometrics and movement quality perspective. But we tend to think of things in like a muscle action sense. So we think, okay, triphasic, right? We think eccentric, isometric, concentric. So we think of movement being, the way that movement happens in a squat. So you have your lowering phase where the muscle lengthens, and then, it stops lengthening, and you have a brief overcoming phase, which is isometric, no change in length, and then you shorten the muscle. But at high speeds, the muscles don't necessarily behave this way, and I got into that with the hamstring deal there. The joints can be moving apart, so it can be an eccentric joint action, but the muscle is probably actually trying to remain isometric, because that allows the tendons and the other fascial or non-contractile elements to then lengthen and spring back and recoil like a rubber band. So we know that from the bodybuilding world, if you want a muscle to grow, you want to damage that muscle, and you do that via eccentric contraction, right? That's why bodybuilders do negatives or emphasize the lowering of the weight. We want to train the muscle so that eccentric actions don't happen, because if the muscle is not isometrically strong enough to maintain a steady state, two things are going to happen. If an eccentric contraction does happen because the isometric strength isn't great enough, well, then there's going to be damage to that muscle. If that happens in your hamstring when you sprint, that's how you pull a muscle. 2, if you're not able to hold an isometric contraction, then you're not going to have as effective of a catapult effect from the tendons and the other fascial tissues. So, long story short, we may be missing the boat with the Nordic hamstring curl exercise. And, maybe this is Dolan being controversial, but are we training a quality that is not actually helping the hamstrings? Maybe we need to pursue some isometric hamstring work. And, despite me saying a controversial thing there actually is an article that I include in the course, which basically the title of it is completely debunking that, saying that no, there actually is an isometric action. It's basically a direct response to Franz Bos's articles. There is eccentric action in the hamstrings during a sprint. But here's where things usually go. The truth usually lies somewhere in the middle, right? Do we have to just do eccentric training or just do isometric training? We could probably do both. Do we just have to do unilateral training or bilateral training? Well, we can probably do some of both, that type of thing. What's another controversy thing? I'll come up with another example at some point. But usually the answer for issues that people get all upset about and yell at each other on Twitter about, usually, you can probably do both. And, it's on you to determine what the right time is and what the right way to implement that type of training is for you and your athletes at that given time.
Man, I love that. And I hope this makes the rounds to like social media, just because I'm so tired of seeing people argue with each other on social media about I do it this way and I've gotten results. Well, I do it the opposite way and I get results. Like, great, you both got results. Like, at the end of the day, that's awesome. And it's funny, I've actually heard Dan Paff say many times that Nordics are a waste of time. And then I've had people we did the Altus course, and in the same room, they were like, no, this is a great exercise. And like you said, it probably lies somewhere in the middle with most things. For me, most of the time, I'm pretty gray on most things, because I can see both sides and I can have conversations with people on both sides, and I filter what I like, what I don't like, what I think will work in my population, what won't. And then I can take that and I can kind of form my own opinions and my own ideas about things. And I love that. So talking with like training for isometrics and the hamstrings and things like that, do you have specific exercises in the course, like demoing, things like that? Like, can you give us an idea, like an example of what you're using for hamstring isometric training?
Absolutely. Yes, I have the whole process lined out. So basically, I mentioned Dan Fichter before. He basically has laid out a 3-step process of training, which I just straight up stole because it's awesome, and it's super applicable. So basically, step 1 is all about position. Can you achieve a certain position, and can you demonstrate sensory motor competency within that position? To steal a Pat Davidson term. So like, can you get into a position, period? And then can you create tension and strength and stability within that position? Once you're able to do that, okay, so example number 1 there, the easiest way that I lay out in my presentation is a split squat. Can you just hold an isometric split squat at a decent range of motion with your pelvis in a good position, with your thorax in a good position, and create tension there? From a hamstring perspective, can you activate your hamstrings, in an increasingly difficult position? So the easiest position to access that is going to be the point at which they have the greatest leverage, which is going to be at 90 degrees. So everyone in the world has seen a 90-90 hamstring lift. Well, that's why you do 90-90 hamstring lift, because it puts the hamstrings in the best position to extend the hip. So can you do that? Can you actually do a 90-90 hamstring lift with your hamstrings and not your back? That would be, the simplest regression of step 1 in the progression there. And then can you increase that difficulty? Like, as you move toward a position of greater hip extension, can you continue to utilize the hamstring isometrically? So we have a whole bunch of progressions there that basically take you to that. Step 2 is then, can you withstand or absorb force rapidly within that position? So for that split squat, I utilize things like drop catches or like altitude drops in a split stance, to be able to decelerate. So, typically people would say, okay, well, that's eccentric training. Well, maybe, it's isometric or eccentric or whatever. It's deceleration, probably a combination of both. Who really cares? From a hamstring perspective, can we start to load you up in more difficult positions? So basically, I try to get you to a supine, they call it a Chinese plank. Like, your shoulders are on a bench and your foot's on a bench, and you can load plates on the midsection of your body there, to challenge your hamstrings big time. And then I try to get to the Franz Bos gold standard exercise, which is basically a single leg GHR isometric hold. It's challenging. He wants you to be able to do 5 reps of 3-second holds with half your body weight. And that's some pretty serious strength, and some pretty relevant strength to going out there and sprinting. So that I would consider all those step 2 there with the hamstring. And then step 3 is, can you absorb that force properly and then re-accelerate? So, if you follow my social media, you see that I do a lot of kettlebell self passes, that type of thing. Those are things that I took from Corey, who's done a ton to popularize that type of training. There are a million ways you can do it. It doesn't have to be with a kettlebell, but something where you're training that full coordinated pattern of absorbing or withstanding force and then re-accelerating as effectively as possible. So at that point, from a hamstring perspective, you need to then, maybe not, if you're locked into a GHR, you're not necessarily going to be able to re-accelerate anywhere, but you can add a speed component. So you've developed the isometric ability to, hold and create a lot of force, but now can you do that quickly, which is something that obviously you have to do when you sprint. So you can add then a drop catch to the GHR hold. Or you can do something like an Alex Natera ISO switch or ISO catch, where you're basically just training the ability to create that force fast. So maybe that's a step 2, maybe that's a step 3. I don't know. I guess I lost myself in my own progression there, exactly where it fits in. But it's a very general progression. Like, can you activate a muscle in the proper position? And then can you activate a muscle in a more difficult position, like lengthening a lever? Then can you handle it with increased load? And then can you handle it at increased speed?
I love it. And as we talked off camera, I dove into the spring ankle stuff and the isometrics from Cal and Chris during the alt site, and just had tremendous results with my jumping and my sprinting. And I just felt like I was hitting the ground so effectively. And like just watching video of myself, like my heel drop wasn't as much. Like I just felt like I was controlling myself, and it's 100% the isometrics that I was doing. And I know you said you dive in a little bit with the spring ankle stuff as well. So dude, it sounds like a really, really awesome course. And I'm hoping people will dive into it, because like I said, for me, the biggest thing is that it's a bunch of different influences all going into the same place, and you have it all in one spot, so that if I read this, if I go through this course and then I'm like, I really like this, who was his influence here? Oh, okay. It was this guy. Now I'm going to go to his and branch out, instead of being in 90 different branches and trying to condense it into one. For me, I start at the one and then I can branch out from there. How about in terms of just, let's say I want to create a course for myself. I don't, but let's say somebody listening wants to create one of these courses like you did. Can you just go through like the process, how much time it took, like putting all your resources together, and then what you use to kind of launch that course out into the general public, just in case somebody listening does want to create something?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a long process. I'm not going to lie. I think some of the traction that I got was because I decided to share some of that rehab process that I was creating with my knee last year. And that was kind of that was the early quarantine days. Literally feels like a lifetime ago at this point, if you can remember way back then. I think a lot of people were interested in what I was doing, because a lot of people deal with knee issues. A lot of people deal with patellar tendinopathy. So at least a few people out there kind of got to know me as that guy. And then I think it was in August or September, I got asked to give a presentation kind of about that topic. And that's where it started, just like, by creating an hour long presentation. And I actually only covered like part of what is now section 1 or section 2 or whatever, the ISOs and movement quality. And I covered a little bit of the tendon health stuff. But this was something I wanted to do. I'm always big on trying to educate as much as I can. And I'm a firm believer that in order to really understand something yourself, you need to teach somebody else. And so I decided, hey, I would like to go all the way with this thing. This was, still at a time when I was stuck in the house and needed a project, because I was driving myself insane without, a goal and something to really put my energy and effort into. So I threw it all into this, and through the process of going through it, you find other sources, you find other ideas. And I mean, I guess this will be the second Bruce Lee reference that I've had, even though I'm like not at all a martial arts guy. Like I'm not even part of that community, but Bruce Lee says, something to the effect of basically take take what's useful and incorporate it into what you got going on, and then just throw the rest out. So, that's how you ultimately, everyone's trying to build their own system of how to go about training their athletes. So we talked about this last time. If you can cast your net as wide as possible and expose yourself to as many different systems as possible, take what you think is useful from them and apply it to your own system. That will help your system grow. And that's the process that I take with anything. So I guess that's why people that defend rocks and that type of thing annoy me, because it's like, oh, I'm a whatever guy. Like, I follow whomever's system, and I'm a disciple of his, and this is the way, Mandalorian, and that's how it is. Like, okay, well, I've studied that system too. I use part of it. Here's what works for me. Here's what I've incorporated, and I threw the rest out. I'm not going to name names, but there are a whole lot of them, and they're all good. Like, that's the thing. Like, people don't put out information that doesn't work. They put out information because they've tried something and gotten results and they believe in it. So, okay, cool. Well, I'll keep that in mind and I'll try it, and I'll keep what works and I'll throw away what doesn't work. So anyhow, I decided to do that with isometrics because it was something that I was interested in. It was something that I saw a lot of value in, because I think, probably I mentioned efficiency in terms of being the intersection point between performance and health, but also they're super, super practical. Anyone can use isometrics. You can use them for any population. Hopefully we're going to be playing minor league baseball games this year, but Lord only knows what the situation is going to be. Any other year besides last year, we all took for granted that, okay, you're on the road, you get a gym bus, you go to whatever gym, you set it up, you take your team to the gym, and you got your program, and you can pretty much run a normal deal. Are we going to be able to do that this year? I have no idea. We may end up having to train guys in the hotel, or get the whole team together for a team lift in a hotel ballroom, or in the parking lot, or in left field, or in the bullpen. If that's the case, I think you're going to find a lot of value in utilizing isometric training. That may be the biggest bang for your buck. If you can do nothing else, give your guys some isometric split squats, do some push-ups, do some core work, do some ankle stuff. And that's going to be, reasonably effective until you can get home and get back into your weight room. So I think that's just what I tried to do. I try to strike the perfect balance between theory and application. Give enough context of, physiological properties that govern kind of the things that we're talking about. Obviously I talk about a lot more than just isometrics, to put it in greater context of how this helps and why this matters. But I also try to strike a good balance between the why and the how. So it's practically applicable for anyone.
Well, it sounds like you put your quarantine time to really good use and kept yourself sane when some of us were keeping ourselves sane by watching Tiger King. You were putting some time in.
Don't worry.
That was on your breaks and everything.
Oh yeah, we blew through that pretty quick.
Dude, I appreciate you coming back on, and I'm super excited for you to be back in pro ball, and especially to be with us with the Sox. We had contact info last time, but where can people get your course or get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the process or anything? Is social media the best, or is there a better place to go?
Still Hammer of Dolan on Instagram and Twitter. I respond to everyone that contacts me on there. I'm not super popular, but I like talking to people about this stuff and about training and about anything else we got going on, just to try to help all of us get better, and to try to learn myself. I do have like a link tree thing in my Instagram profile, and you can access the course from there. I don't have a website yet, so I put it on CoachTube. And if you enter PBSCCS at checkout, you'll get a nice little discount there. So definitely utilize that.
Utilize the code, get the discount, and keep learning. Dude, for real, thank you for coming on. And obviously, hopefully I'll be seeing you soon, and we'll definitely be in touch soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Hopefully by the time you listen to both of these episodes, you will have taken at least something away from Dolan. So I guess we'll see.
I think definitely. Thanks again, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that concludes this episode with Jeff. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you enjoyed both parts of this two-part series. Again, if you haven't listened to the first one, I would recommend doing that. It was a really good episode comparing his time in the NBA with his time in professional baseball and how the two sports are similar in terms of training and how they're different. And then obviously in this part, we went through his isometrics course and isometric training in general. If you do decide to buy the course, again, use the code PBSCCS to get a discount at checkout. So thank you, Jeff, for that. 3 things that I took from Jeff in this episode. Number 1, isometric training is where training for health and training for performance meet. Number 2, isometrics can be used with any population. And number 3, cast your net as wide as you can. Use what is useful for you and discard the rest. Before we end this episode, I just wanted to give one more shout out to all of our all-star sponsors. These companies are Momentous, Woodway, Aura Ring, Garden of Life, Proven 4, Direct Fitness Solutions, and Clean Athlete. Thank you again to all of those companies for being all-star sponsors of the PBSCCS. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.